Have you ever wondered why a man pulls away just when you think he's coming closer? There you are, raw, open, still wrapped in the warmth of shared skin and secrets. The sacred threshold of closeness has been crossed. The masks were lowered, even if just for a night. You let him into your temple, not just your body, but the tender corridors of your hopes, your breath, your softest laughter. And for a moment, he looked at you like he truly saw you. But then silence, or worse, a shift. His energy, once magnetic, becomes distant. His messages thin out. His gaze no longer lingers with the same fire. You wonder what changed. You replay everything. You question yourself. Was it something you said? Something you did? Were you too much? Not enough? What most women don't see is that this unraveling doesn't begin after intimacy. It begins in the silent aftermath of their own self-abandonment. Because the real mistake is not in the giving, but in what you unconsciously give up after. Too often, a woman conditioned by centuries of ancestral ache and social scripts slips into the oldest archetypal wound, the belief that her worth must now cling to the man she has chosen, that she must prove, chase, earn, or maintain his affection now that she's been vulnerable. And so, the maiden becomes the supplicant. She texts too soon, trying to affirm his continued interest. She reads between his silences like a desperate oracle. She changes her tone, her rhythm, even her truth, just to stay desirable in his eyes. She becomes smaller, sweeter, safer, hoping he'll see her as irreplaceable. But here's what she doesn't understand. No man of substance is drawn to a woman who betrays herself in the aftermath of intimacy. A man who is integrated, who is capable of devotion. He doesn't seek a woman who needs him to soothe her insecurity. He is magnetized by a woman who remains rooted in herself, especially when her heart is wide open, because it is not vulnerability that repels the masculine. It is the loss of feminine sovereignty after vulnerability. When you collapse into needing reassurance, when you start spinning stories to fill his silence, when your energy becomes anxious, clingy, or self-doubting, you are no longer embodying your sacred feminine. You have slipped into shadow. This is the moment when the animus, your inner masculine, has been outsourced. You no longer trust yourself to hold your own emotional center. You unconsciously assign that role to him, and that projection is the very thing that pushes him away. A woman who knows her worth does not scramble to secure love after intimacy. She expects that love will meet her where she stands because she has never left herself behind. But most women were never taught this. They were taught to equate physical connection with emotional bonding, as if a man who touches your body owes you his devotion, as if intimacy is a transaction, and she must now negotiate her value post-sale. And yet, the feminine is not a bargain to be struck. She is a force, a mystery, a current. The moment she forgets this, she dims her light, and the masculine, forever drawn to polarity, instinctively withdraws, not always consciously. Often he himself does not understand why the air has shifted. He only feels the energetic truth. The woman before him is no longer the magnet, but the seeker. And the seeker, though innocent in her hunger, distorts the dance. A man cannot fall for a woman who has vanished into need. He cannot bond with a soul that has abandoned itself. He is built to love a woman who holds herself like a queen, even in the echo of silence, even in the mystery of what next, even when her heart is aching to know where she stands. So understand this. The mistake is not in opening, not in loving, not in trusting. The mistake is in forgetting who you are once the fire burns low, in shrinking after being seen, in craving instead of receiving, in reacting instead of remaining. Because the ideal man is not kept by your closeness. He is kept by your clarity. Not in how quickly you respond, not in how available you make yourself, not in how much effort you pour into proving your worth after the moment has passed, but in how unapologetically you remain the woman who knows that her body is a temple, her emotions are sacred, and her love is never a currency to be bartered for crumbs of attention. And so it begins. The unraveling of the masculine's fascination does not come from the intimacy itself, but from the shift in your energy that follows. It is not what you gave, but what you believed that giving meant. In that moment, after the vulnerability, after the breathless release, after the emotional bearing, after the collapse into closeness, what he feels is not just your body. He feels your essence. And he senses whether you are still there with yourself or whether you've vanished into him. A woman grounded in her feminine energy does not give herself away when she gives herself to someone. She knows that intimacy is a sharing, not a surrender of self. But a woman who carries unhealed wounds, the abandoned girl archetype, the unchosen maiden, the fragmented lover, she often confuses vulnerability with obligation. She believes she must earn love post-intimacy. She believes she must now be on alert, calculating his behavior, anticipating his withdrawal, bracing for rejection or worse, trying to preempt it with performance. And this belief carries a heavy cost. She becomes energetically anxious, emotionally hypervigilant, and spiritually disconnected from her core. She leaves her throne. She forgets that she was the mystery that drew him in, that it was her essence, not her effort, that magnetized his desire, that it was the way she belonged to herself first, that stirred something ancient in him. And when she loses that, when she steps out of her feminine radiance and into the desperate energy of pursuit, the masculine's instinct to merge begins to falter. Men, in their most primal psychology, respond to energetic integrity more than words. They don't fall in love with your logic, your reasons, your explanations of why you're texting or how much you care. They fall in love with the way you hold yourself, even after emotional exposure, with the quiet certainty that says, yes, I open to you, and yes, I still belong to myself. This is the spiritual spine of the sovereign woman. She does not shrink after intimacy. She expands. She becomes more of herself, not less. She does not chase, overgive, overthink. She allows, she waits, not in passivity, but in presence. And in that waiting, she's not seeking affirmation from him. She's observing him, watching who he becomes after the vulnerability, not to judge or control, but to discern, to see if he can hold the space she inhabits, to see if he rises to meet the depth she offers. This is the crucial moment most women never claim, the power of discernment after intimacy. Because it is not the man who draws away who is the threat. It is the woman who chases after him, trying to prove her value in response to his retreat, who wounds herself in the process. The feminine must relearn how to receive before she reacts, to feel the ache of distance without internalizing it as personal failure, to witness the shift in a man's tone without shrinking her own expression, to remain in her body, grounded, whole, even as uncertainty creeps in. This is where the true test of feminine maturity lies, not in how you seduce, but in how you stand still in your own presence once the veil has been lifted. The Stoics taught us, if you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. Marcus Aurelius knew what few understand, that suffering arises not from what happens, but from what we make it mean. And so, when a man becomes distant, your first instinct must not be to reach, to plead, to fix. It must be to breathe, to witness yourself, to remember your value is not negotiable based on his consistency. Your essence is not validated by his messages, his plans, or his desire. You are the storm and the stillness, the temple and the fire, the muse and the mountain. And if he cannot hold that, if his masculine wavers in the presence of your unwavering feminine, that is not your loss. That is your revelation. You did not lose him, you saw him clearly. But to see him, you must not disappear into him. You must remain whole, still, awake. There is a moment, sacred, subtle, when a woman, newly intimate with a man, faces a silent crossroads. One path leads inward to herself, to her sovereignty, her depth, her wholeness. The other leads outward, into him, into his moods, his responses, his presence or absence. It is in this moment that she makes the mistake, not deliberately, not maliciously, but by reflex, a reflex shaped by lifetimes of stories that taught her to earn love through attachment, instead of allowing love through embodiment. She abandons her inner temple to wait at the gates of his validation, and in doing so, she fractures the magnetic field between them. The man feels this shift, not with logic, but instinct. Her energy, once sovereign and alluring, becomes needy. Her aura, once mysterious and self-contained, leaks into his. The polarity reverses. What once drew him in now presses upon him. The subtle pressure of expectation is laid at his feet, and it kills the very thing she longs to protect. Desire, because nothing chokes masculine desire more than emotional responsibility for a woman who has emotionally evacuated herself. He cannot desire what he is expected to rescue. He cannot adore what he is burdened to reassure. He cannot chase what is already chasing him. Understand this: the masculine is not built to confirm you. He is built to witness you, but only when there is something to witness. Not a woman shaped around his presence, but a woman grounded in her own essence. This is where the Stoic woman lives, not cold, not distant, but unattached. Her love is pure, but not needy. Her presence is open, but not poured out. Her attention is sacred, and she gives it where it is earned, not by performance, not by grand gestures, but by steadiness, the masculine quality she knows she deserves in return for her feminine vulnerability. And so she does not panic in the aftermath of intimacy. She does not spiral when he needs space. She does not collapse when his messages slow down. She does not beg the world to tell her what she means to him. She already knows what she means to herself, and that knowing, that stillness, becomes her power. This is the paradox that escapes most women. The more you chase love after intimacy, the more you erode the very foundation upon which it could grow. Because love is not grown in the soil of desperation. It blooms in the presence of self-possession. A woman who remains emotionally anchored after intimacy teaches a man something profound, that her heart is not a wound waiting to be sealed, but a sanctuary already whole. And this, paradoxically, draws him closer, not out of obligation, but out of awe, because in a world full of women who vanish into men, who twist themselves into knots to be chosen, who wait by the phone hoping for signs, the woman who stays sovereign is unforgettable. He will feel her absence differently. He will sit with her silence not as a punishment, but as an invitation to rise. He will sense that she is not waiting, she is watching, not with bitterness, but with discernment. And in that discernment, she reclaims the sacred role the feminine was always meant to play, not the chaser, but the chooser. Because when she remembers who she is, when she stops shrinking after intimacy and instead expands into her essence, she no longer seeks to be loved through another. She becomes love itself, not the frantic kind, not the desperate kind, but the divine kind, quiet, radiant, rooted, a force that bends the air around her. A mystery that awakens the deepest part of the masculine, not his ego, his soul. But this can only happen when she refuses to betray herself in the vulnerable aftermath, when she replaces the urge to prove with the power to pause, when she meets her ache with compassion, not panic, when she allows the moment to unfold without bending herself to control its outcome. This is not easy, it is not always comfortable, but it is the way of the awakened feminine. She does not perform for love. She remembers she is love, and in that remembrance, She becomes untouchable by anything that does not honor her. To remain unmoved by a man's ambiguity after intimacy is not indifference. It is initiation. An initiation into the deepest layers of feminine power, where the emotional chaos of the world no longer dictates the rhythm of her heart. This is where the path of individuation begins. Carl Jung spoke of it. The sacred journey of becoming whole, of integrating all the parts of the self that were once disowned. And here, in the dim corridors after intimacy, is where a woman often finds the broken mirror of her unhealed feminine. The little girl who aches to be chosen. The seductress who uses allure to gain approval. The caretaker who believes love must be earned through pleasing. These parts whisper to her in the silence after closeness. He hasn't texted yet. Maybe you should check on him. He's probably losing interest. Do something to make him stay. Don't wait too long. Remind him of what you are. But these voices do not come from her soul. They come from the shadow. The shadow is not evil. It is the part of the psyche we have not yet brought into the light. And for most women, that shadow contains the belief that their worth is conditional, that to be loved, they must abandon the very self they want a man to adore. And so, post-intimacy, they begin to shapeshift. They edit their truths, they mute their desires, they initiate conversations not from joy but from fear. They smile, but inside they are waiting, hoping, aching, not for love, but for security. But here's what the awakened woman begins to understand. There is no true safety in a man's response, only in your own. The more she seeks control through closeness, the more she will lose the control that matters most, her emotional sovereignty. It is the woman who holds herself in that tender aftermath, with grace, with silence, with power, who transcends the cycle of disappointment. Because the mature feminine knows intimacy is not a transaction, it is a revelation. And that revelation is not just about the man, it's about her. Who does she become when she is open? Does she stay grounded, or does she float into fantasy? Can she stay embodied in her own skin, or does she leak into his story, his silence, his inconsistency? The Stoics taught us to focus only on what we can control, our thoughts, our actions, our choices, and the same applies here. You cannot control how a man moves after intimacy, but you can control whether or not you remain rooted in truth, instead of spiraling into illusion. The truth is this: if a man is worthy, he will not vanish after intimacy. He will reveal himself. He will not play games. He will not test your anxiety. He will show up in alignment with his words. But if he doesn't, if his distance grows, if his energy fades, then the divine gift of intimacy was never the moment you shared. It was what it revealed about him. And if you are quiet enough, not just in action, but in mind, you will hear the truth echo in that space. A truth that asks, will you choose yourself now, as deeply as you chose to open to him? Because the woman who cannot hold herself after intimacy will always fall into cycles of craving. She will confuse chemistry with compatibility. She will mistake anxiety for intuition. She will attach to ghosts and call it love. But the woman who holds herself like a sacred flame, even in the aftermath, even in the ache, she changes the narrative. She breaks the ancestral pattern of waiting to be claimed. She claims herself, and in doing so, she becomes the kind of woman no man forgets. Not because she chased him, not because she tried harder, but because she did something rare. She remained whole, even in the absence of reassurance. And that wholeness is what calls the right man forward, not immediately, not always cleanly, but undeniably, because the feminine that knows her power is never in pursuit. She is the invitation, and only those who rise to her frequency will stay. There is a silence more powerful than words, more piercing than anger, more sacred than affirmation. It is the silence of a woman who chooses not to chase, who does not fill the gap with anxious energy, who does not seek to soothe the discomfort of not knowing, because she trusts what will be revealed in the not knowing. This silence is not coldness. It is presence. It is alignment. It is a sacred space where the masculine is invited to step forward or fall away without being coerced. Most women never access this silence. They fill it too quickly, with apologies that were never needed, with messages that mask fear as interest, with desperate attempts to make themselves feel seen, heard, wanted, without realizing that these very attempts erase the woman they truly are. But a woman who knows herself, who has walked the fires of her own shadow, who has faced the places within her that once begged for love. She is different. She does not seek a man's reassurance to feel real. She is already rooted. She understands that true intimacy does not bind through need, but through choice. And so she waits, not in passivity, not in manipulation, but in power. She waits to see who the man becomes when her silence is not a test, but an invitation to authentic connection. Does he step closer? Does he bring clarity? Does he act with honor? Or does he retreat into avoidance, into ambiguity, into distraction? His response reveals everything. And she, in her grounded stillness, is watching, not with judgment but with wisdom, because she is no longer looking for a man to complete her. She is looking for a man who is complete within himself, a man who is not intimidated by her stillness, a man who sees her silence not as distance but as depth, because she has become something rare in a world of noise. She is not performative. She is not desperate. She is not available to confusion. She is the woman who knows how to be, even in uncertainty. She is the woman who does not betray her soul just to keep a man intrigued. She is the woman who understands that the way she holds herself after intimacy is more revealing than any words she could say. This is the archetypal queen, the mature feminine. She does not bargain with her worth. She does not argue for attention. She does not tolerate emotional half-steps. She does not seek to be the exception to a man's avoidance. She lets the avoidant fall away because her life is not a waiting room. Her heart is not a testing ground. Her body is not a lure. She is a woman in her full expression, and only a man rooted in his full expression will match her, and if he doesn't, she lets him go, not in bitterness, not in rage, but in reverence, because she sees clearly now he was not a mistake, he was a mirror. He showed her where she still abandoned herself, where she still sought love at the cost of dignity, where she still feared being alone more than being misaligned. And now, with that clarity, she rises, not louder, not needier, just more herself. And the man who is worthy of her will feel that shift. He will feel the absence of her chase, the absence of her performance, the absence of her need. And if he is a man who desires depth, he will return, not to reclaim her, but to earn her. Not because she made herself available, but because she made herself sovereign. The difference is everything. The woman who chases after intimacy will always be waiting to be chosen. The woman who remains in her power after intimacy becomes the chooser. And when she chooses, it is never from fear, it is from fullness. She no longer waits with bated breath for breadcrumbs. She no longer checks her phone with a silent ache, hoping that his desire survived the night. She no longer shapes herself around the whims of a man who has yet to earn her steadiness, because the awakened woman has reclaimed the most sacred truth of all. Intimacy is not what binds. Alignment is. And a man can share your bed, touch your body, speak your name in the dark, and still not be ready to meet your soul in the light. She sees this now. She sees how easily women are seduced not by men, but by potential, by fantasy, by the projection of what he could be, instead of the clarity of what he is, and she no longer feeds that illusion. For too long, she believed that the moment a man became intimate with her, the bond was sealed, that his desire would grow if she gave more, that she could shape the unfolding by proving her value. But now she understands, value is not proven, it is embodied. And the mistake The devastating mistake 99% of women make is believing that intimacy secures love. It doesn't. Love secures love. Consistency secures love. Presence, respect, alignment, devotion, these are what secure love, and they cannot be begged into being. They must emerge naturally, sovereignly, through the man's own readiness. And if he is not ready, she does not make herself smaller to fit his hesitation. She blesses the experience, honors the truth it revealed, and turns inward, because she knows now every intimate moment is also a mirror. It shows her not only who he is, but who she becomes when the fire fades. Does she rise, or does she cling? Does she breathe, or does she chase? Does she remember her essence, or does she make herself forgettable, trying to be easy to love? The woman who has returned to herself refuses to be forgettable, not because she demands attention, but because her presence lingers, because she leaves a man not with guilt trips, but with clarity, with the imprint of a woman who never gave her soul to someone else's confusion. And the irony is this: when she no longer needs to be wanted, she becomes unforgettable. When she no longer waits to be claimed, she becomes undeniable. Because the ideal man, the man who is anchored in his own masculine integrity, is not seeking a woman who performs love like a song and dance. He is seeking a woman who embodies love even in silence, even in uncertainty, even in her solitude. And that woman is not created by what a man gives her. She is revealed when she refuses to give herself away. This is the final transformation, the sacred return, the moment when a woman reclaims her feminine sovereignty. She no longer asks, "Why didn't he stay?" She asks, "Why did I make his staying the measure of my worth?" And in that question, raw, liberating, final, she steps beyond the archetype of the abandoned lover. She becomes the initiated feminine, whole, embodied, awake. And from that place, she no longer fears intimacy, because she knows now it is never about the moment shared. It is about who she chooses to be after. She will still love deeply. She will still open. She will still share her warmth, her breath, her body. But she will never again make the mistake of believing that the moment a man touches her skin, he has touched her soul. That requires more. And only the one who can stand in the heat of her wholeness, who does not pull away when she stays in her center, only he will be let in again, not because she needs him, but because she chooses him. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase. She chooses.